Good morning, KBOI. This is Dylan Stalker. Every single weekend, Dylan Stalker, me, the Great Idaho Show. We are here today to talk about what is great about Idaho. Every week at Sunday at 7 a.m. at 670 a.m., 93.1 FM, and the KBOI app. You can listen to the Great Idaho Show, and every single week we are just simply trying to bring you what me, a multi-generational Idahoan, a 3.5 generation Idahoan, is trying to bring what's great about Idaho. Sometimes it's an initiative, sometimes it's a person, or just a great business. Today, we have what I believe to be a great initiative that I have a lot of questions about, and I think that a lot of other people have some great questions about. And we're going to talk to Steve Zettel, who is focused on something called the Not in Wilderness Coalition. What is the Not in Wilderness Coalition? Well, before we get there, and we talk to Steve that's sitting with me here in the studio today, we're going to talk about our sponsor. Our sponsor, one of the best. Idaho is a firearms state, and one of the best businesses in Idaho for collectible firearms, Western and military, is Old Arms of Idaho. oldarmsofidaho.com, your ambassadors to America's heritage. Think of it like Antique Roadshow for something important, curio, a relic, something just neat, and you're just wondering about it. Call Old Arms of Idaho. They are your firearms estate transition specialists, and they also deal with everything under the gun sun in the firearms business when it's collectible, vintage gun parts, reloading, books, knives, swords, bayonets, Western, and you get the idea. So, again, we are sitting here with Steve Zettel, who is now started something called the Not in Wilderness Coalition that has a lot to do with the Frank Church Wilderness. Steve, welcome to the show this morning.
Morning, Dylan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. You and I are talking because I study Idaho everything. I listen to the media, I read the media, and I study it because I care about what's happening in Idaho, and I too am a wilderness person. I have a part of my heart in Loman, Idaho that we experience every day. And I wonder what is happening with technology in the wilderness. And I just so happen to come across this thing called the Not in Wilderness Coalition, which I would love for you to describe to us. But before I do, give us a little backstory on you and Idaho. How did you get to Idaho?
That's one of my favorite questions because I always say a Greyhound bus. And that's legitimately how I got here. That was back in 1980.
Yeah.
And I showed up in Idaho pretty much the same day that President Carter signed the Central Idaho Wilderness Act.
Oh, wow.
Which is interesting. That's the Frank.
Yeah,
it was
the Frank Church.
The River of No Return Wilderness Area. And then in honor of Frank Church, they called it the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness. And now we just all call it the Frank, and it makes it a lot easier to discuss if we just call it the Frank.
Sure.
Yeah. And so since 1980, I have operated consistently in the Frank, both running the Middle Fork of the Salmon. I've been licensed on the Maine Salmon, and I've been a land-based hunting guide and outfitter for decades. I started as a guide in all those fields and then eventually bought my own business on the river side and on the hunting side. And so I think I'm at about 30 years of being an outfitter in the Frank, both on the Middle Fork of the Salmon and on Big Creek with our land-based operation, which Big Creek is the largest tributary to the Middle Fork, and we're on Lower Big Creek, so our land-based operation borders the Middle Fork as well.
So let's clarify a couple of things because we have a motivation here today. Our motivation, what I believe, is the Not in Wilderness Coalition, but me being the Great Idaho Show, the Great Idaho Show also includes businesses that are doing something great, and I've always been looking for a great guide in Idaho. And you want to talk about a great location, there is nothing like the Salmon River in Idaho, period, end of story. Movies were made by it. The River of No Return, there's people keep coming back. So, what is the name of your business and how do they find you?
We are Idaho Wilderness Company.
Okay.
We're in Chalice, Idaho, and you can go to IdahoWildernessCompany.com or you can go to floatidaho.com. Either one gets you there. Pretty simple Google search. We're in Chalice, Idaho. I live on the Salmon River that you're talking about. Beautiful place to live there in Chalice. We're blessed to be able to operate in the Frank. Our cover shot for our brochures and whatnot is my wife and I sitting at the mouth of Big Creek, where it runs into the Middle Fork, and that's our office location. We like to joke, and we are extremely blessed to be able to operate in the Frank and share that experience with the folks that we do. Yeah.
So this is important for building what the purpose of this entire interview is all about, because we have a gentleman that not only has been in Idaho for over 30 years providing guide services in some of the most important parts of Idaho when you talk about the natural nature of why we all moved here. But we're also talking about what I have studied up to this conversation to be a great business, because in order to be a great business, you have to be able to say that you've been doing this for more than 30 years on the Salmon River. Wisdom doesn't just come overnight. You can't just read up on this. If you've been floating the Salmon River or hunting the Salmon River, and in order to say you're one of the greats, it definitely comes with 30 years. So as we build this, why you also wrote a book, which I'd like to point out. What is the name of your business and how do they find you if you're wanting to adventure the Salmon River or hunt in that area near Chalice, the River of No Return? How do they find you?
Well, like I said, it's Idaho Wilderness Company.
Okay.
And it's just simply Idaho Wilderness Company, spelled out,
Okay.
.com.
IdahoWildernessCompany.com.
Yes.
Our motivation here today is to ask the question, and the question, how would you frame that? I think I would know how to ask that question, but how would you frame it, Steve?
Which question is that?
The question of technology and wilderness.
Well, it's a funny topic to begin with. If you haven't been there, if you have no experience in wilderness, what we call wilderness, basically a place that you can get away. You know, the Congress defines wilderness one way. Some of us might define it in many different ways. Webster has his own definition of it, right? But basically, I think we all get the gist. It's an area that's different than others, and it has opportunities that don't exist elsewhere. And the issue with technology is that one of the greatest attributes of what we call wilderness, and I like to lean more on the wilderness experience than the actual physical nature of wilderness. Wilderness provides the opportunity for this wilderness experience.
Sure.
Okay. And that wilderness experience doesn't have to happen actually in a wilderness. I mean, it's that ability to disconnect, and it is a product of time and separation. You know, I'm no scientist, but I'm no therapist either, but I have experienced a lot of what I'm talking about. And I know that it takes, we're talking 4, 5, 6 days or longer of separation from reality, from the real world, to experience what we're talking about. And if you break that up in any way, then you have to restart. That's the issue, right? Like if you came with me for 2 days and then got on a payphone and called your wife and heard about all the world's problems and whatnot, and then came back and joined us, you missed it. It's over. That's gone. Okay.
I feel like, Steve, I got to tell you, I get the blessing of living close to the backside of the Sawtooth, Grand Jean, South Fork of the Payette River. It is prehistoric. And you've got a lot of people out there taking anti-anxiety medication. You've got a lot of medical things happening there. And I'll tell you what, the most powerful thing in my life is that quiet that is not quiet at all. And just the time slowing down to be out in the wilderness. We've got about 60 seconds
So what I would like to finish up with that 60 seconds to make everybody think
Please.
is that if if I was to say that tomorrow they plan on going in and clear cutting half of the Frank Church, they plan on opening up 6 strip mines within the Frank Church.
Yep.
They plan on eliminating all the wildlife in the Frank Church. People would be up in arms, correct?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And yet, the greatest attribute to wilderness is at risk right now, bona fide risk. And no, very few of us realize it. And that's what we're here to talk about today.
And that risk, I'm going to clarify for y'all, is technology in the wilderness, or at least designated wilderness. We have boundaries out there, but is it just to those boundaries? It's all over Idaho. We're talking about the church, the Salmon River, the river of no return. This is Dylan Stalker, the Great Idaho Show. We'll be right back. Good morning, KBOI. 7 a.m. this morning on 670 a.m., 93.1 FM, probably somewhere around 7:15. We're sitting here with Steve Zettel. Steve Zettel of the Idaho Wilderness Company, Steve Zettel of the Not in Wilderness Coalition. We're talking about the Frank Church Wilderness. This is an act of the president back in the 70s. This is a protected area, and this is the gift of God to life and all over in the West here. We've spent this last segment here talking to Steve about his experience and why this is important. He's been doing this in Idaho for over 30 years. So I think he deserves a platform or a voice to speak to something here, because he is out there every single day in the Frank Church Wilderness and on the Salmon River. And, you know, he's seeing lots of things happening. And one of the biggest questions that are coming up here is, how do we deal with technology in the wilderness? Is that what, so I'm assuming something. Steve, would you do us a favor and just describe the Not in Wilderness Coalition and what it's all about?
Yeah, perfect. So let's just call it the NIWC,
okay,
just to get through it a little easier.
Yeah.
The notion is simply this, that I can go to my local coffee shop, my little group of outfitters, my guides, my guests, and, you know, voice my opinion, jump up and down, be upset with people using, you know, cell phone here and satellite phone there and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but there is no place, no public forum to address the situation as we speak.
Okay.
You know, where does the Forest Service, outfitters, outfitted guests, private users, fishing game, you know, where do we all go to share those ideas? So the notion of the NIWC, the coalition, is to create that platform. Now, granted, the people that are participating in that will all have their own opinions, as I do as well. Okay? But we need to be fairly open-minded through the process. I like to believe that the coalition is going to begin with open dialogue, conversation, facts, opinions, and then we'll have debates, and ultimately maybe a decision process that we can all kind of work with. And that decision could range from anywhere. You know, look at the great things that have provided better opportunities in public lands, like leave no trace.
Absolutely.
Or pack it in, pack it out. Right?
I think everybody can relate to those two statements.
Right. We could also question the one about, you know, only you can prevent forest fires, but you know, but that was a great idea, right? You know,
you could stand in the way of lightning if you want to, but that's okay.
Well, and I even talked to folks about, you know, when I was a kid, you were allowed to litter. Like people don't realize you weren't always not allowed to litter. That became a law, but it was just a great idea. You know, they had the Native American crying on TV because there was trash along the highway.
Sure.
And so some of those things are pretty light-handed, and they work really well. Maybe the solution is as simple as that. Or maybe, you know, is it an iron dome over all wilderness areas, you know, for communication and satellite technology and what? I don't know. All I know is that the conversation is necessary. And the reason it's necessary,
thank you,
is because as we speak, if you have a modern cell phone in your pocket, you can now point it at the sky, depending on your service, and link up to satellite pretty much anywhere in the world, which did not exist 1 year ago. did not exist 20 years ago, did not exist back in 1964 when Congress enacted the Wilderness Act, or in 1980 when they did the Central Idaho Wilderness Bill. So why now? Simply that. Now you have 10,000 plus users on the Middle Fork, 10,000 plus users on the main salmon, all the different hunters and backpackers and jet boaters, and everybody you can imagine suddenly now has this ability to be at home, technologically speaking. And is that a plus or a minus? I'm one to say it's a minus, because once again, I'm not about the place as much as the experience, and nothing will detract from the experience as much as what I just spoke of.
As the technology in the hands of the people themselves, right? Like, what is the experience you're getting if you could just plug up to X or Facebook or anything on any given day? It devalues the experience as a whole. I think if I'm summarizing, because ladies and gentlemen, my goal is not to direct what I think here. I think I have a gentleman that's been in Idaho operating in one of the most important parts of Idaho land that I can possibly think of, the River of No Return, the Frank Church Wilderness. You know, entire governments have identified these as special places before they even had a concept of the cell phone. So how do we keep them special? And now what's interesting, I'll give a little bit of a thought that happened between you and I. I came across the Not in Wilderness Coalition, and I'm like, hey, what's this going on? This is important. I noticed that you had been a guide in a place that I love. I've been there too. I've floated that river. And I noticed your write-up, and I reached out, and I'm like, hey, let's talk to Steve. You know, within a day that I asked to interview you, my phone said, hey, in the next month, you'll be able to send text messages via satellite in a non-cellular area. My property in Lowman has no cell phone service. And I'm like, holy smokes. This was in a couple of days of me even talking to this person. You are definitely onto something, Steve. And clarify if I'm wrong. But you are simply using the Not in Wilderness Coalition to open up a platform for the conversation. And there are many opinions about whether we should or we shouldn't. But I think it's 100% apparent, and agree with you, that there is a reason for the conversation to happen itself. Does that describe it pretty well?
I think that's pretty much spot on. And I would continue on with that notion in that, you know, how do you begin a conversation that would include, let's call it wilderness, right? Let's call it designated wilderness. Well, you know, what is that? Is that what's been signed in by acts of Congress? What most people don't realize is that we have an act of Congress from 1964 that allowed for the creation of wilderness.
Okay.
Now, every wilderness that we've had since then, specifically, has its own layer of rules, regulations, compromises. Right?
New thought, right?
Right. Well, you know, because without compromise, you can't get anything done in Congress, right?
Sure.
And so whether it's the Selway Bitterroot, the Frank, you know, the Gospel Hump, wherever, each one of those wilderness has their own little set of rules and regulations that differs it from the rest. Okay. So I by no means would say that, you know, whatever happens will transcend everywhere, but where do you begin? What's the best place to begin this conversation? Well, I say the Frank. And the reason for that, back in the, I would say it was the mid-90s, right here in Boise, Idaho, we had the Wilderness Symposium.
Okay.
And the saying at that time was, so goes the Frank, so goes wilderness. Meaning, basically, whatever we do in the Frank is probably going to transcend down through all these others. And one of the main reasons for that is the Frank is so unique in the compromises that were put in place in its creation, right? Like, they didn't condemn property. There's still some logging goes on. Yeah. There's still some mining in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, there's commercial operations.
That's sensible things happening, I believe.
There's hunting, there's fishing.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a national park. You can walk up the trail or you can get off the trail. You know, like, it's a really cool place. Now, is it as remote as what we might in individuals' minds call wilderness? I don't know. That would be up for debate.
get 20 miles down the river and you tell me if that's remote, but that's okay.
Right. Well, it's all relative.
Yeah.
I had a Forest Service gal one time. She was put in charge of determining new locations for proposed wilderness. And I said, well, how are you delineating one from the other? She says, I don't know. Well, what would you do? And I said, well, I know what it isn't. And she was like, what's that? I said, well, if you drop me off naked in the middle of it and I survive, I don't consider it wilderness, And anyway, she didn't really appreciate
Spoken like a man that's lived in Alaska too.
Yeah. So anyway, and as you know, there's places up there I would not survive.
Absolutely.
But if you drop me off 20 miles down the Middle Fork, I'd get out. I'd be embarrassed, but I would make it out. So, but I think it's a great place because of its diversity to initiate this conversation, and that's why the coalition has chosen the Frank. One, because I have so much experience there.
Yeah.
And two, it's diversity and it's numbers. Like, we don't have 2 or 3 outfitters. We have a couple dozen Middle Fork outfitters, a couple dozen Maine outfitters. We got a couple dozen hunting outfitters. We got private lodges, airstrips. We've got fishing, hunting, jet boats. We got all this stuff. We got the Forest Service. We got 3 different national forests that are participate. I think 2 different regions.
Yeah.
So it just is the perfect place for everybody involved to have this really broad conversation with all this, diverse perspectives, so to speak.
Well, and it's the only single wilderness area in Idaho that has its own special license plate. I think that's for a good reason too. This is Dylan Stalker, your 3.5 generation Idahoan. I think this is an important conversation. I'm sitting here with Steve Zettel of the Not in Wilderness Coalition, also the Idaho Wilderness Company. If you want to get out there and go check out the River of No Return, the Salmon River, one of the greatest. We do need to say a little thing about our sponsors here because there is a bit about that going on. Old Arms of Idaho. Old Arms of Idaho, they are your firearms, Western, and military specialists. You've heard this. They are ambassadors to America's heritage. They own the 24-hour gun show online at oldarmsofidaho.com. If you think you have that curio, that relic, something of historical significance, or just whatever you think you got laying around that's got firearms, Western, and military associated, 208-602-6027 or oldarmsofidaho.com. This is the Great Idaho Show. We're here with Steve Zettel of the Not in Wilderness Coalition, and we'll get right back to it right after this segment. Good morning. Welcome back, KBOI. This is Dylan Stalker, your 3.5 generation Idahoan. This is the Great Idaho Show, thegreatidahoshow.com. We have weeks and weeks and weeks of these conversations of people that I have spoken to. That's great about Idaho and me. It's my opinion. I've been in Idaho my whole life. The people that I'm speaking to, I've engaged with, I've talked to, I've considered, I've been there. I'm giving you a plug right into what is great about Idaho, thegreatidahoshow.com. Today, we are visiting with Steve Zettel. Steve Zettel has been a guide, a wilderness guide in Idaho in the Frank Church wilderness area with his company, the Idaho Wilderness Company, for over 30 years now. And, something's been coming out over the last 30 years, Steve, since you arrived here when when President Carter designated that as a wilderness. Technology's coming into play, and that's the conversation we're continuing to have. I do have a question for you, though, Steve. A lot of people are confusing pro-wilderness with being anti-progress. Like, how do we feather that line?
Well, you started by saying that your show is about the great things of Idaho.
Absolutely.
Well, I would argue that the Frank is one of the greatest things of Idaho. Not necessarily because we can go in there and steal all the gold and steal all the timber and everything else. If you look at a globe and you just mark the Frank on it, if we can't get those things from elsewhere and the Frank is the only place left to get them, we're pretty much done anyway. So it's probably okay.
Humans are going to take it over anyway. It's
like
like the cockroach of life,
So I know that, when I first arrived in Idaho, it was the brand new baby. And the term, land of no use was bantered about by folks that were anti-wilderness, let's say. Okay, well, how about those tens, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of folks that have visited the Frank and left with life-changing experiences?
Yeah.
That there's a value to that. And I guess I could debate that all day long with someone that was anti-wilderness, especially when, if we leave, it'll probably be pretty much the same as when we started. But if those other uses were in there, it won't be the same ever again. So I'm not anti-logging or mining. I think it's all necessary, but it's necessary to have places that it isn't. And these experiences that we have are important. And going back to your statement, what's great about Idaho? And I say that the Frank is one of the greatest. Well, let's talk about the Frank then. What's the greatest attribute of the Frank?
It's a salmon river, right?
Well, but it's the experience. It's you can go over here to the airstrip, fly in for the day, fish, and come home. That's not what I'm talking about. You go float the Maine salmon or the Middle Fork, or go in there on a 7-day hunt or a pack trip, or go put your backpack on a trailhead and go in for 7 days. That will change you if you leave the world behind. It will change you. There's no doubt. Those that never experience that don't know that. And I hate when people banter, you have a moral responsibility for this or that or whatever, especially when they talk about corporate America.
Oh my goodness.
It's like, no, they have a responsibility to make money and take care of their, live up to their contracts and make money for their,
they have one thing. It's YOYG, right. Year over year growth. That's it. Growth.
There you go. But sometimes if you're in a position that's unique to help people, lots of people, help the world, and you don't do it, I think that is a moral obligation,
sure.
when that realization hits you. And there's a few of us out there that realize we do have a moral obligation here with this issue and what we're calling wilderness. Somebody just showed up last year and worked as a guide on the Middle Fork. They wouldn't understand. Somebody that probably doesn't have a mortgage, kids, business, problems, whatever, they wouldn't understand if they haven't had the need to find or an experience like you can get in the Frank or wilderness or in the backcountry anywhere, just back with nature. My wife would argue that it goes way beyond that. It broadens your horizons to get away. Even those that don't have, quote unquote problems suddenly get direction, from their wilderness experience.
But so for me, again, I am literally right here on the air with Steve Zettel right now, getting exposed to these concerns. I too genuinely have concerns about the technology in Idaho, but also about the protection of the wilderness itself. We have some big subjects coming up here. At the base, people are like, the federal government owns these lands and we're just going to give it back to the people. Well, you take a look around of the people owning land and what they've been doing with it and whether you think it's been responsible or not. I don't think as much. And I think about my home in Loman, and just all of a sudden there being cellular internet everywhere. And I got to tell you, it terrifies me. Because wilderness, the definition of wilderness to me is, it's kind of like you said, if you can be naked in it and survive, then it's not wilderness. But you put the phone in the hands of every human out there and it's no longer wilderness. They're all connected to GPS. They're all looking for the mushrooms around the burn area and posting it on social media. And then guess what happens? About 1 million other humans start showing up and we don't have a wilderness area anymore. We just have a collective of humans. I think this is a very important conversation, and something's going to be more apparent every day because Idaho is wilderness, right? This isn't Nevada that is just miles of flat floored desert, just nothing. This is the bounty of the West, the bounty of America. And I appreciate you coming in and speaking with us today, Steve, and just opening our minds to this.
I appreciate you having me. You know, when you introduced me, you talked about the book that I wrote.
Yes, please clarify that book you wrote.
Yeah, and I like to sell the book only because the proceeds go to the coalition.
Well,
but
and it's a good book.
The notion of the book was simply, you know, my wife had asked me, you know, if you're an outfitter in the backcountry for decades, people are always going to ask you, well, you should just write a book. And okay, but what are you going to write a book about? And I never wanted to write There I Was book, you know, the biggest elk, the biggest waves, the biggest, you know, that's fine. If they're good, I'll read those stories maybe, but I wanted to do something special. And so what I would call my book is a wilderness advocacy book. And sure, there's some stories in there, but some of them are self-indulgent and some of them are self-deprecating, but they're all true, you know, my version of truth. And the stories in the beginning, there's 3 parts to it. One is my first year in Idaho. The next, my first season, I should say. The next is kind of the next 4 decades in Idaho. And then to substantiate the part 3, which is my opinion on the future of wilderness. And part 3 rolls into the necessary evils of, you know, technology moving in. And there's actually a deeper level, which maybe we'll talk about in the next segment, that goes beyond just the personal use of technology. That's maybe more important than actually just bumping into somebody talking on the phone in the wilderness and interrupting yours. But the book is not in wilderness, the book is the Organic Treadmill and Other Great Powers of Wilderness, and it's basically for sale on Amazon.
So the book again is The Organic Treadmill, written by Steve Zettel, Zettle, right?
E-L.
Thank you. And that's so people can look that up on Amazon and make sure that they get the right author and the right book. And I 100% support that. You know, to write a book is just, it's not easy. I mean, maybe ChatGPT could write your book for you today, but I guarantee you Steve wrote and it is about wilderness. It is about Idaho. And you all here on 670 AM, 93.1 FM are able to listen to a gentleman that has been operating a business in wilderness in Idaho from the basis of what it was created for. And things are changing, folks. And the Not in Wilderness Coalition, if I understand it correctly, is just simply trying to create a forum, a communication zone to raise these issues. And let's have the conversation. I'm having it with Steve right now. I have a lot of questions. I wonder too, but I live in wilderness too. And I got to tell you, the idea of people jumping on their robot dog and GPS, just taking them into the highest part of the mountains without even lifting a finger, just because it's all technologically collected, that's a destruction of wilderness. And if you allow one, then you have to imagine a million doing it at the same time. There's got to be some governance here. And I think Steve is doing a good job at that. So, but before we go into the next segment, you mentioned, Steve, that there were some things that you would like to talk about. Tell me what that is so we can guide this next segment. We only have 10 minutes or so in this next one.
Well, essentially, there's kind of 3 parts to the issue.
Okay.
Right? There's our experience, you know, that we would have or not have, you know, based on the availability of technology, especially communication technology in the backcountry. The other thing is, you know, we have, me as a professional outfitter, I have an insurance mandate from the Forest Service.
Yes.
Says that I have to do these things. The insurance company says that I have to do these things based on industry standard. Okay.
What is that?
Well, what is industry standard, right?
Sure.
So now, if I am capable to communicate from boat 1 to boat 5 and talk about whitewater rapids coming up or the weather that might be coming in, or maybe, you know, am I now responsible to check into town to see what weather's coming tonight?
Okay.
To make it safer for everybody?
Which is all liable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, let's say outfitter A is all about the technology, and so he adopts it all. Everybody sits around the campfire. Instead of singing songs, they all check their email, right? And outfitter B is trying to go old school. Well, something happens to outfitter B. Well, guess what? He's outside industry standard, right? And so this whole thing will drive the experience that I'm allowed to provide for my clients. That bothers me quite a bit.
Sure.
I would think that most people, if your grandfather came down the river with an outfitter, 50 years ago and wanted to bring his grandchildren, I think he's expecting to get the same experience.
It's about accepted risk, right? This is an accepted risk of floating down the river of no return. Did you catch the title? Maybe there's a little bit of risk there, but and so then what's the third thing?
Well, those two,
Okay.
they go together. We have the insurance mandate, but we also have the industry standard, and the industry standard, kind of will drive it all, and the ability that technology is providing us will drive industry standard,
and it'll drive responsibility, and it might. All it takes is one lawsuit. I got to finish this segment up here because I'll bet we could talk for a good 4 hours, Steve. This is Dylan Stalker, The Great Idaho Show, thegreatidahoshow.com. You can listen to episodes anytime. I love KBOI 670 AM, 93.1 FM. Radio is amazing. That's why I'm here. I love radio. But ultimately, we can also listen to this 24 hours a day at thegreatidahoshow.com. And we're talking to Steve Zettel, the Idaho Wilderness Company, the Not in Wilderness Coalition. This is Idaho, folks. Let's pay attention and let's see what we can do. As I am told, we are rolling here at the Great Idaho Show. This is Dylan Stalker, your 3.5 generation Idahoan, a man that is in love with Idaho. And what is great about Idaho? I will tell you what, there is nearly no place in the world that has as many unique parts of wilderness in Idaho. One specifically, the Frank Church Wilderness, the Frank. I'm sitting with Steve Zettel of the Not in Wilderness Coalition. He owns the Idaho Wilderness Company. He's a gentleman that has been guiding in the Frank Church Wilderness area for more than 30 years. And what we're talking about today is technology in the wilderness and the Not in Wilderness Coalition being a platform for at least the intelligent conversation of what we do and what we don't do. Steve, in this last segment, you pointed out, my stomach got cold. The concept of technology and business and all the accountability and all the risk and all the insurance. I mean, we might as well just get out of business right now. What is going on? Describe some more of that for me.
Well, I would like to just the realities of modern technology in current wilderness.
Okay.
What is that going to look like?
Okay.
I think one of the reasons that we're probably just ahead of the curve here with this conversation is because people haven't lived it yet.
Yeah.
The last few years, there's been a few people with their inReaches, maybe a sat phone. Somebody brought a portable Starlink on one trip or something. They'd have those things. Starting as we speak, everyone has those abilities. And so, those quiet...
Clarify that for us immediately, because the radio listener, in their phone right now, they have a phone that if they bought it within the last year, what does that mean?
Okay, so my wife and I drove an hour to a mountain lake the other night to have a little picnic on our boat. We were there all by ourselves. When I got done, I loaded up the boat. I was going to take a picture of it sitting on the trailer, and my phone said, "Hey, if you want to check your messages, just point to the sky and you'll get satellite reception."
Yeah, just kneel before Zod and accept the terms and conditions.
And, and curiosity got the cat, and I had to give it a try just to see if it would work. And I didn't have to sign up for anything. I didn't have to agree to anything. I was hooked up.
Yeah.
Now, picture that with 10,000 Middle Fork users, 10,000 Main Salmon. The 20-some thousand Frank Church users this summer and fall, right? So, okay, you say, well, it's the wilderness and I should be able to do whatever I want to do. All right, so let's buy into that one. What does that look like? So I'm going down the river in my raft, And on occasion, I'll pass somebody else on the river on their raft. And there's a huge difference between somebody with their phone, which is always their best camera now, right? That's the excuse. If it didn't have a phone, we wouldn't, or a camera, we wouldn't be talking, right? But because it's the best camera, everybody's got it out 24/7. So there's a big difference. If you float by me and you see me take a picture of the bird or the fish or whatever, you're like, okay, he's taking a picture. If you see me holding it up to my ear and talking, I've completely ruined your day as well as mine.
You've ruined my day.
Absolutely.
You ruined people's days at the checkout stand while you're buying a soda. Imagine that in the wilderness.
Right. And so, now add the ability to have music, add the ability to do a live podcast from your favorite hot spring,
influencers will take over it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, that's what it looks like to those that understand what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
To those that don't, they're poo-pooing the idea like, well, it's probably not that big of a deal. So we have to get through the summer of 2025, and then there'll be the revelation. There's no doubt. There's no doubt that this conversation that you and I are having will happen all over the country in the fall of 2025. I'm totally positive of that.
Well, and I think that you clearly, given your time and experience, that's one thing. Not only that, you've written a book, The Organic Treadmill. It's on Amazon. If you want to get to know Steve Zettel and where he's coming from, read The Organic Treadmill. I haven't. I commit to. I know that I'm already connected to Steve because I'm a wilderness man. I'm in it every day of my life. I, too, feel the impacts of that wilderness nature. You have these things like OnX Hunt that can tell you exactly how you can go and circumnavigate everybody's private property and get as much as you can out of it. There's some big things that will come out of this, and I don't know if we know what it is, but it sounds like, again, the Not in Wilderness Coalition. Steve, would you please share the website? Because I want people listening to be able to go and learn more about you.
Just simply notinwilderness.org. Notinwilderness.org, spelled out.
It's not going to be not in wilderness anymore if you have the power of what was born in the city put into the wilderness. But, there's a lot of arguments in there, safety being one of those arguments. How do you speak to that?
It's interesting. One of the things we have to agree to in our special use permits with the Forest Service is that we're going to be safe.
Yeah.
Is that the dumbest thing you've ever heard?
No, we're just naturally unsafe here.
Well, but how, I couldn't be safe walking someone to the 7-Eleven. I can't guarantee that. And now we had, class 4 whitewater and, horses and mules in the backcountry and snow and, just big game
occasional
hunting.
Animal that does things with humans every once in a while. I won't mention them like rattlesnakes anyways.
Right. So now, now as odd as that, term is that we have to agree to, now the industry standard will go way up. Picture an incident on the river. Okay. Just any kind of an incident.
Yeah.
It used to be you dealt with it. And if it was an emergency that required, let's say, a rescue or first aid or whatever, then somebody would crack out that emergency communication and that person would deal with it. If there's an issue on the river right now, there will be 24 people dealing with that issue in their own way.
It's probably, it's the safest it's ever been today.
But it's crazy. Like, I was reading an article about a school that did their like a class trip of some sort, and they walked down near the Hoover Dam. They went for a class trip just for the day.
Yeah.
Kids were thirsty, so they called 911 saying they were dehydrated, they were lost and whatnot. And the teachers are like, "We were right there the whole time."
Right.
Imagine now, like one boat goes this way, the other boat goes that way. Well, Google says, AI says that when you're running Velvet Falls, you're supposed to do it this way, right?
Sure.
Well, what? You know, it's like
and then your average, pardon the terminology, your average Karen thinks they're smarter than the person who's been running the river for the past 30 years and happens to know that a log fell in that part of the river that wasn't there before. You know, AI can't see the logs in the river. Folks.
Well, some of this stuff, you know, is just sort of, you know, you're speculating how it's all going to go down.
Yeah.
But here's the reality. For the past 10 years, we have required that our clients fill out a wilderness ethics agreement when they come with us. And basically it says, you're not just coming on a float trip with us, you're coming on a float trip in the wilderness. And that requires this. And it basically lists what we want you to do and what we don't want you to do and what we don't want you to bring and da-da-da. And everybody agrees to it. They all sign it. And in the end of the day, they all probably cheat a little bit, you know. But the reality is, for all the consternation that was before that, you know, like people are like, well, I have to be able to talk to them. I have to, you know, and you just draw the line in the sand and say, no, you can't. It's been the greatest compliment achieving thing I've ever done after guiding for 50 years. I've guided from Pennsylvania to Idaho and Alaska for 50 years. And I've never gotten the compliments for all those efforts that I've gotten from simply saying, put your phone away.
But you're an educator, okay? You're educating practical uses of time and experience in the wilderness. You know, when I grew up, Triangle Sea, floating the middle fork, I know these places and I've done this, but something as simple as don't pour your food out in the river because there's actually a natural landscape happening here. We shouldn't have to remind people of this stuff, but you do. This is a tough one. We've got about a minute and a half here, and here's what I'm going to say to you, Steve. I think this conversation continues with you and I. I'm openly reaching out to you to say, as long as I am doing the Great Idaho Show, if you have something coming up that involves this conversation that's coming about right now, I support you. And if something important is happening that we are all just discovering right now that you are on the forefront of, I would love to be a part of the voice to help what's happening in Idaho wilderness. And I welcome you to the show at any time that you think it would be something that's happened. And in the meantime, we are talking to Steve Zettel of the Not in Wilderness Coalition. It has a lot to do with technology in the wilderness. Steve's very motivated about the church, the Frank Church Wilderness. And quite honestly, when you think about the river of no return, the Salmon River, we are talking about one of Idaho's cherished pieces of wilderness. This is Dylan Stalker, the Great Idaho Show. Look up the Not in Wilderness Coalition. If you want a good guide trip, look up the Idaho Wilderness Company with Steve Zettel. You'll get the time of your life. I can just assure you that just by seeing him in the face, I could tell. This is the Great Idaho Show, thegreatidahoshow.com.